What you're about to witness will make your blood boil and question everything you thought you knew about loyalty in WWE. Paul Heyman, the man who has manipulated superstars for decades, finally got what was coming to him, but not in the way you'd expect. Jey Uso, the so-called loyal soldier, just crossed a line that has the entire WWE universe divided, and when you hear the real reason behind this attack, you're going to lose your mind. They don't want you to know what really happened backstage before this incident. They're trying to bury the truth, but we've got the inside information that will blow your mind. This isn't just about betrayal, this is about years of psychological manipulation finally catching up to the tribal combat advisor, and the explosion that followed will change everything you think you know about the bloodline. Paul Heyman has been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers, but Jey Uso just flipped the entire board, and the pieces are still falling. The injured Heyman thought he was untouchable, protected by his position and his relationship with Roman Reigns, but he severely underestimated the breaking point of a man who has been pushed too far for too long. Here's what WWE doesn't want you to understand about this situation. For months, we've watched Paul Heyman orchestrate the destruction of families, manipulate emotions, and pull strings from behind the scenes like the puppet master he's always been. But what happened in that backstage area wasn't just a random act of violence, it was the culmination of a carefully planned psychological warfare campaign that Heyman himself set in motion. The attack itself was brutal and calculated. Jey Uso didn't just slap Paul Heyman, he dismantled him both physically and mentally in a way that exposed every weakness the special counsel has tried to hide for years. But the slap? That was just the beginning of what sources are calling the most personal and devastating confrontation in recent WWE history. You see, Paul Heyman made a critical mistake. He thought he could continue manipulating the Uso family dynamic without consequences. He believed his injury would protect him from retaliation. He was wrong on both counts, and what Jey Uso did to him in that backstage area will haunt Heyman for the rest of his career. The real story starts weeks before this incident when Paul Heyman began planting seeds of doubt about Jey's loyalty to Roman Reigns. Sources close to the situation reveal that Heyman had been systematically working to isolate Jey from his family, using psychological manipulation tactics that would make a therapist cringe. But Heyman didn't realize that Jey was onto his game from the very beginning. What makes this situation even more explosive is that Jey Uso didn't act out of anger or impulse. This was calculated revenge for something so personal, so devastating, that when you hear what Paul Heyman did to trigger this response, you're going to understand why Jey felt he had no choice but to take matters into his own hands. The incident occurred during what was supposed to be a private medical consultation for Paul Heyman's ongoing injury issues. Jey Uso wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't invited. But he knew exactly when and where to find Heyman at his most vulnerable moment, and that's when he struck with the precision of a surgeon and the fury of a man who had been pushed beyond his breaking point. But here's where it gets really interesting, and why WWE management is scrambling to control the narrative. The reason Jey attacked Paul Heyman has nothing to do with Roman Reigns, the bloodline, or even professional wrestling politics. This is personal in a way that cuts deeper than any storyline WWE has ever produced. Paul Heyman crossed a line that should never be crossed when he decided to involve Jey's children in his psychological games. Yes, you heard that correctly. The man who has built his career on manipulation and mind games made the fatal mistake of bringing Jey Uso's family into his web of deceit, and that's when the loyal soldier became a dangerous enemy. Sources reveal that Paul Heyman had been making subtle threats about Jey's future in WWE, suggesting that his children's security and financial future depended entirely on his continued loyalty to Roman Reigns. But it gets worse. Heyman apparently made comments about Jey's parenting abilities and suggested that his children would be better off if their father learned to fall in line more effectively. When Jey discovered these comments through backstage sources, something snapped inside him that had been building for months. The attack on Paul Heyman wasn't just about revenge, it was about protecting his family from a man who had proven he would stop at nothing to maintain control over the bloodline narrative. The actual confrontation was caught on security cameras, and while WWE is doing everything in their power to keep that footage from leaking, multiple witnesses have confirmed the details of what happened. Jey Uso cornered Paul Heyman in the medical facility, and what followed was a methodical breakdown of everything Heyman represents. The slap that has everyone talking wasn't delivered in anger, it was delivered with cold, calculated precision. Jey looked directly into Paul Heyman's eyes and told him exactly why he deserved what was coming to him. According to witnesses, Heyman's face went white when he realized that Jey knew about his threats against his family. But the physical confrontation was just the beginning. Jey Uso spent the next several minutes systematically destroying Paul Heyman's reputation, his credibility, and his sense of security within the WWE environment. He exposed secrets that Heyman thought were buried forever, revealed manipulation tactics that had been used against other superstars, and made it clear that his days of operating from the shadows were over. What makes this situation even more volatile is that Roman Reigns was completely unaware of Paul Heyman's behind-the-scenes manipulation of his family members. When the tribal chief learns the full extent of what his special counsel has been doing in his name, the fallout is going to reshape the entire power structure of WWE. The injury that Paul Heyman was dealing with suddenly became the least of his problems when Jey Uso made it clear that physical pain was nothing compared to what he was prepared to do to protect his family from further psychological warfare. The attack sent a message throughout the WWE locker room that even the most protected members of management are not immune to consequences when they cross certain lines. WWE's attempt to minimize this incident and control the narrative has backfired spectacularly because they underestimated how much the WWE Universe values authenticity over manufactured drama. When real emotions and real consequences collide with scripted entertainment, the result is always more compelling than anything writers can create in a boardroom. The ripple effects of this confrontation are already being felt throughout the company. Superstars who have felt manipulated by Paul Heyman in the past are speaking up about their experiences. The power dynamic that has protected certain individuals from accountability is crumbling, and Jey Uso's actions have opened the floodgates for others to share their stories. Paul Heyman's reputation as an untouchable mastermind took a devastating hit when he was exposed as someone who would threaten children to maintain his position of power. The man who has survived every political upheaval in wrestling history suddenly found himself completely vulnerable and isolated, with no allies willing to defend tactics that cross every ethical boundary. The most shocking aspect of this entire situation is how it exposes the dark underbelly of WWE's power structure. When someone like Paul Heyman feels comfortable making threats against performers' families, it reveals a culture of intimidation that goes far beyond what fans see on television. Jey Uso's response wasn't just personal, it was a stand against institutional abuse of power. What happens next will determine whether this incident becomes a catalyst for positive change or gets buried under corporate damage control. But one thing is certain: Paul Heyman will never again underestimate the protective instincts of a father who has been pushed too far, and the WWE Universe will never forget the moment when real justice was served against someone who thought he was above consequences. The slap heard around the wrestling world was just the beginning of Paul Heyman's problems, and when the full truth comes out about his systematic manipulation of the Uso family, even his most loyal supporters will have to admit that he got exactly what he deserved.